in the chat, and we have Dr. Claudia Jenkins, my colleague, who will be fielding questions in the chat and then feeding them to me to ask Fabio as well. So just 1 more minute maybe, and then we'll get started.
YouTube is up.
Excellent, thank you. Glad to see you watch your cup, Fabio. Hot drink, choice of hot drink.
It's my
Nice.
lucky cup. Yeah, it's been with me for years.
Excellent. So yeah, I feel like because of these, I need to get more cups. I've used all my cups in one of these, and I need to get. You need a statement, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think we have 20 people, so we're probably ready to go. All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for signing up for this kind of a return of the EconTEAching seminars. We took a month's hiatus to run our EconTEAching conference, which was kind of a big deal. If you haven't seen that already, the recordings are on our YouTube channel, so do check those out. So we're back now, and we have several seminars in July, and then we have several in September. Just lots of things to talk about in terms of teaching. And I know that some people who are attending are not from economics, and I think you'll find that many of the things we talk about are not really econ specific. So there's lots to learn from the things that we talk about. And I'm personally super excited about today, to learning a lot for today. So today's guest is Fabio Arrico from the University of East Anglia. He's a friend of CTEL's, a long-term friend of CTEL's. He was one of our first guest speakers many years ago, actually. He is, among many other things, obviously he's an award-winning teacher. There's a lot of research on various teaching techniques and technologies, and he's also a National Teaching Fellow. So we are in the presence of some greatness here. So the way we'll run this, like the normal way that we run these, is that Fabio will tell us a little bit about the context, what he does, why he does, and so on, to start off with, and then we'll open it up to questions. And thank you to those of you who've sent in questions with your registration. I have a list of them, so we'll be asking those. As I said earlier, Dr. Jenkins is on the chat, both on YouTube and on Zoom. So please, wherever you are, either on Zoom or on YouTube, post your questions. Dr. Jenkins will let me and Fabio know. So we'll try to get as many of those in as possible. So welcome, Fabio, and tell us a little bit about what you did.
Sure. I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully everything is okay on your side.
Yep.
Yep, excellent. So first of all, I would like to tell you something about viva-voce assessment in the wider context. And the first thing that I would like to do is, in fact, telling you about my own experience, because this idea comes from an experience that I had myself as an Italian student. So I come from south of Milan, a university town called Pavia, and this is the crest of our university. And I studied there for my first degree. It was a BSc in business and economics. And of course, back then, especially in the 90s, the teaching practice was a bit more backward, much more didactic compared to what we are used here in the UK. However, for the majority of disciplines, still nowadays, every single exam that you take in an Italian university is composed of a written part and an oral part, which is a viva voce component, basically. And I strongly believe that the viva voce exams that I took really shaped my ability to be critical, to develop discussion skills. So in Italy, a degree in economics is 4 years. So 24 exams, every single one, I actually had a viva voce exam. Even mathematics, which was my first exam, I had to prove theorems in the face of my teacher. Okay. And I believe that if at all, this is something that I would like to bring, bring my Italian experience in my teaching here in the UK. And there is a very interesting paper by Stray that basically tracks the reasons why in the UK as well as in the States, we don't have viva voce exams. And it's all due with the transformation of the way of doing assessment related to the dissemination of the Newtonian theory, philosophy, and approach. So when you become much more mathematical, you move into a written kind of assessment. And this is the experience the United Kingdom lived with the Cambridge and Oxfords, and everybody followed. So a survey by Ansel is actually showing that there is very, very little use of oral examination, and in particular viva voce. There are a few examples that I listed here, and I can tell you more about it or send you references. And since there is no practice, there is also very little research on this. So it's very difficult to find conceptualization that are formal, that are precise, that are illuminating about what viva voce exams should be. At the same time, I believe that this kind of assessment is very much needed. And work that has been done by the Economics Network earlier on, the work that Claudia has just conducted along with the Economics Network is showing that communication skills are very much in demand. Ability to actually explain things to non-economists, creative thinking, imaginative ability. I loved this quote by Jonathan Atto. He was actually online this morning for a forum at the ONS. He's the Deputy National Statistician at the Office for National Statistics, and he was telling us, you know, when I recruit new colleagues, the first thing that I try to figure, will I be able to send this person to brief the Prime Minister? Is this person able to talk? And I think that this is particularly important. So just to say, it's true, we have presentations. So we do have some forms of oral assessment that we are familiar with. But in a viva voce conversation, the power dynamics are completely different. So if you would like to position yourself on a spectrum, you can imagine that in individual presentation, once you assign the task, the student has full control on what he or she are going to do. Whereas, of course, in an evaluative conversation, the teacher might be much more in control because he's asking questions or she's asking questions, and the student doesn't know which question might be. So there is a continuum on the spectrum on which you can choose to position yourself. And most certainly I moved on the other side of the spectrum, but each one of us can imagine they can position themselves somewhere in between. And in my opinion, this is the closest that we can possibly get to a job interview. You know, when in a job interview, you might have a presentation component, but then somebody's going to ask you questions. You don't know what the questions might be, and you will have to give an answer on the spot. So what's more authentic than a viva can you possibly have? So coming down to my experience, I applied this also for a very specific need. And the very specific need is the fact that I teach a module in history economic thought. So we are going as far as we can possibly get from mathematical formalization here. And so imagining delivering an exam, closed book, in a couple of hours, where students are sitting there and regurgitating something that they're trying to cram in their minds in the few days before, it's really pointless to me. And I said, no, I just want something which, like, students are able to demonstrate their critical ability by talking to me. And the kind of design that I came up with has been a coursework only module where I have a video presentation. So I assess students through videos. They submit in a group. And then they write a critical essay. They choose their own essay topic, so they can span across the different theories, discuss the topic with me, and they write their essay. And then the final exam, they walk into a viva voce session with me, face-to-face. The first half of the viva voce assessment is discussing the feedback they received in the essay. So I'm going to give them a lot of feedback in their essay. They get back to me, and they have to address points that I made, connections with other theory that I want them to develop. The second half of the viva, I can ask anything on the syllabus. So absolutely everything. and students have to respond. They get assessed according to a standard rubric and receive the very quick feedback, and that's the end of the story. So this is pretty much what I've been doing, and my pitch is here, and I'm open to receive any kind of questions about what I'm doing in more detail.
Parama, am I allowed to start?
Sorry, I can't. Hang on. 1 second. Fabio, can you maybe unshare and then we can see you?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. That's super. Someone else wanted to start with a question.
Parama, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Am I allowed to kickstart the question?
You can go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back to, if it's a quick question, because then we'll come back to lots of other questions that are coming in on the chat as well.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I may have not got the rules correctly. Should questions reach you on the chat? Or
on the chat, yeah. On the chat would be great, but since you're here, why don't you go ahead and ask, and then we can start with that.
Apologies then for this one. I've missed this point. Fabio, thank you for this one. First question, and then I will go and write the other ones. Are we talking about a big, small cohort, undergraduate or postgraduate?
Okay, it's undergraduate assessment that I'm talking about. The first, so I ran this module for 3 years now. First year I had 70 students because we allow both second year and third year students to take this module as option. So it's an optional module. And of course, third years that I didn't have the chance to do in second year, they fled in. So I had quite a big spike to begin with. And following year was around 50 students. Last year I had 25. This coming year I should have 35, 40 students. These are the kind of numbers that I'm working with.
That's really, it segues right into sort of one of the first questions that were submitted. Well, one of the questions that were submitted, which there were a lot of people interested in this, was about scalability, because that's kind of a big issue. So do you have any advice on sort of how to make scale these things? I mean, that's my personal issue as well. I have a final year course, which had 175 people.
So my VIVAS are 20 minutes long, so between 15, 20 minutes. And you can extract quite a lot of information from there. And have in mind that history economic thought is quite a problematic subject, where you have to go through theories, philosophies, methodological approaches. So I will imagine that if you have a slightly more technical subject, one of the economics like development, labor, I will imagine that actually you can be much more efficient with your time, because you can ask a student to sketch a diagram, or like, this is what my experience was when I was an undergrad. I was sitting there and they would say, okay, let's talk about the overshooting model. And I will just sketch the diagram and explain what was going on with this model and so on and so forth. So you can be much more efficient. And I will imagine that you can actually reduce the time you are assessing each student for. I cannot recall. I mean, far too many years have passed. But yeah, I think that 20 minutes was the kind of time that we were allocated when I was a student myself. 20, 30 minutes, perhaps, depending on the subject. So the advantage that I have, well, for my scene, is that I'm the only teacher in history economic thought. So of course, there are challenges to consistency, because I'm not even the same person from morning to afternoon, for sure. But problems might arise if you got a pool of markers. What I would recommend to do is to do calibration. I'm a strong believer in calibration, which we should do anyway, which is basically agreeing on marking criteria when you start the marking process. I absolutely hate moderation. And in fact, the new course on external examining by advanced HE is actually claiming that moderation is not this panacea that many colleagues believe it is. So what I will suggest to do, and what I will do if I had a colleague with me, would be assessing together the first 3-5 VIVAS, just sitting next to each other, agreeing on the criteria, and then going on. The other thing that I found extremely beneficial, I'm going to show you, is using some tools. You know, the problem with consistency is a very big one. So so if you can see here, I use these two tools. So the first one is a marking crib. So all my VIVAS are recorded, by the way. We're probably going to get there later. But I take a quick note as I'm actually interviewing the student about which question I'm asking, and just getting an idea about how the answer was and how much I needed to prompt in order to get that answer. So once I fill this in, what I do when I conclude my VIVA and I say my goodbyes to the student, I moved on a pre-filled rubric. So it's very detailed. It took me forever to do this, and I'm not happy yet. I'm still trying to perfect this. And it was incredible how useful this is, because I have to stick to the plot. So of course, I'm not entirely deprived from biases. I'm not perfect, nobody is, but this tool allows me to really stick to what my criteria are, remind myself what the criteria are and what are the class of achievements step by step. And this year is the first year that I implemented this, and it's been excellent. So once again, you know, referring to the same tool and a very detailed marking tool, in my opinion, is one of the ways you can reduce the bias and coordinate across quite a large pool of markers. And by the way, this is something that doesn't apply just to VIVAS, applies to many kind of assessments.
So I think there was a lot of interest in the rubric. So if you can share that with us, and both
Absolutely.
of them, the first grade and the rubric, that would be great. I think sort of coming back to the issue of moderation, because there were questions about that also. So do you right now have moderation of your course, external examining, like the usual things that we have here
Absolutely.
in the UK?
So, so what happened in the pre-COVID as well as in the post-COVID world is that all the VIVA will be recorded. So students are asked to be recorded. I never had a problem with that. If they refuse to be recorded, they are warned that they will have to be given another VIVA if they appeal. Whereas, of course, if there is a recording, there is no need.
Yeah.
So the recording of the VIVA, along with the marking crib, along with the rubric that you've seen where I highlight the spots where I believe the student is sitting, and another couple of lines of feedback, everything is uploaded on the VLE. So the students can see all of that. Of course, each students see their own performance and only theirs. But myself, the moderator, and the external examiners have access to the VLE. They can go there and they can do whatever they need to. If the mark is appealed, of course, administrative services can also go in to check that the administrative procedure has been followed, and then an external marker can actually be appointed and go and mark that particular VIVA. Of course, you know, the marker is going to hear my questions, but that we can basically screen out the feedback that the student received so that the other marker is not biased. So in terms of quality assurance, I treat this exactly as any other piece of assessment.
So following on from that, sort of a related question, which you kind of answered, was that obviously these kinds of assessments, presentations, any kind of thing like this is by definition not anonymous, which is a big deal in this country. And people from other countries find that strange that we're so hung up on anonymity. Have you had any issues with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't. I had a lot of issues with colleagues, and this is always a contentious point where I present this work. And of course, this is one of the most contentious points where I had to get across all the red tapes from a bureaucratic point of view. And I would like to share some, I'm still sharing, no, I'm not, okay. I still like to share something like this, you know, because I've been thinking about this quite a lot along the different presentations I gave, you know. So first of all, one of the reasons why we are so biased is that, of course, you know, this tradition on sticking on written assessment is very strong in the Anglo-American world, you know. So we are not even prepared to conceptualize the concept of assessment in an oral sense. So the other thing that I was thinking about is, like, we are much less hung up on presentations, but it's pretty much the same thing. The kind of biases that we might have in presentations, we might have in VIVAS. Of course, in VIVAS, as teachers, we have more power. The balance of powers is much heavily weighted on us. So I acknowledge that. But we either wipe off presentations or we accept the VIVAS are a piece of assessment as well. And the other thing is that I believe that we are really hung up on everything that is got a mark associated to that. I was having a conversation with a colleague who was one of the sweetest soul I ever met, you know, like really caring about the students. And he was telling me like, I don't want to do this because I have unconscious biases and I don't want to affect my students. And I was telling him, yeah, but then you couldn't even have office hours, because when you go office hours, a student comes to you, and unless you actually sit behind a confessional, I'm of a Catholic upbringing, so I experienced that as well. And you just sort of like, you don't even see the person that you're talking to. Yes, you might have biases. You might have biases. But I will also argue that written assessment carries some biases. The kind of English writing style that students submit with are giving clues about where they're from. From the handwriting, I can tell you if the student is Chinese, if the student is American, the handwriting of American students is different. You can really spot it. Italian, whether it's a male or female, you can properly tell, you know. And so there are biases there also in written pieces of work. And also, I mean, the last one on the list for me is the decolonizing the curriculum agenda. If we want to open up the curriculum, allow students to make their own choices, of course, these choices are revealing who the students are. So there are a lot of biases there. My answer is that, as I said, number one, there is all this quality assurance framework that I was describing, which is taking care of a lot of issues. The second thing is that it's a risk management issue. So there are some risk of being biased, but there are also opportunity for development there. So should we really deprive the students from this opportunity of development just because there are risks? And in my opinion, the answer is no. The other issue is between students themselves. Written assessment, especially in the post-COVID era, is much easier to plagiarize than a VIVA. It's very difficult to plagiarize a VIVA. I mean, unless the students have auriculars with radio and people suggesting in their ears, I cannot even imagine how they will do that. Twin brothers and sisters, I don't know. So to a certain extent, we are preventing bias because we are genuinely assessing the skills of the students. My message is that I will encourage colleagues to be brave. I feel that we need to be brave. I mean, we are brave every time we walk into the classroom. I'm an Italian lecturer teaching about Brexit, and we all know what happened about that. And I'm also brave enough to run VIVAS, but I believe that many of us should be as brave as me.
That's an excellent answer, actually. And I think I agree with you about the plagiarism and contract cheating and stuff like that. And I think there are huge inclusivity issues there, which are addressed by something like a VIVA, but VIVAs have separate inclusivity issues. So, you know, there's no perfect thing, right? You have to balance it out. So related to that, there's a couple of different questions which I'm going to combine together if that's okay. Sure. So what's kind of implicit in what you're saying is that you believe that there are certain learning outcomes that are best served by VIVAs or not served by other forms of assessment. So what do you think these are? And, you know, why do you think they're not served by other assessments? And you kind of said a bit of this already. And related to that, do students see this? So do students understand the value of what this thing is? And if not, how do you teach them? And how do you sort of train them also? Because this is something new for everyone, right?
It is, and it was for me. And of course, I'm getting better and better. And if I go back thinking about how I did the first year, I reflect about it in horror, and now I know better, you know. So let's see. So remind me the first point. Sorry, I've got the memory of a goldfish.
I'm calling it brain fudge nowadays. Yeah, so the first question was about learning outcomes that are best served by or only served by VIVAs.
Yes, so I've been reflecting on that, and I believe that what we are not able to assess with presentations is this uncertainty and this preparedness to respond to something that is unknown and uncertain until the point where the teacher formulates the question. But that is essential because in a job interview, for how much you prepare, you will have to face that kind of uncertainty. So it's far too easy for students, or overall in their education, train themselves to pass papers, for instance. It's something that I really dread, and I refuse to give out papers. I make sure the past papers are really useless for students. I mean, because this is not the way. I mean, like training on past papers is surface learning that I really despise. And I try all my best not to do that. So preparing students to address unexpected questions is important. And also to make mental links amongst different theories. Far too much we are compartmentalizing our teaching. The modularization of learning has made so that if you think about growth theory, you only think about growth theory. But you can talk about labor, you can talk about inequality, you can talk about all sorts of different issues. And of course, in a conversation, you can make link across different theories. You can go where the conversation is flowing. And as a matter of fact, I tell my students that they're most welcome to try and steer me away from what they don't know. So we have conversations about techniques on how to cope with that, right? So I said, if you take me towards a direction on which you get me interesting enough, I'm gonna forget about what we were talking about, and I'm just gonna follow. But you have to be clever about that, And but if I see
maybe
that
maybe you can incentivize this by saying that you're training them to be politicians, right? Never answer the question that's being asked. Answer what you want to say.
But at the end of the day, when these students are gonna go out there, they will be asked to provide quick answers and solve problems creatively at the snap of a finger. And perhaps that's not going to be the best answer they could actually do by preparing themselves and writing drafts. But this is how the real world works. And to me is extremely important. If you're okay with this, I will move to the second point.
Yes, I think that sounds really good. And I think, again, kind of implicitly you make this point, but there's, it's important for job interviews, but as all of us who have been grad students, we know that when we're on the job market, you have to prepare elevator pitches. Absolutely. And be able to respond to questions which you never know, because there's people from different fields there. Yeah. But you need to do it in all kinds of different jobs also. So academic jobs, obviously, we present. That's part of our thing. And if anyone's been to an economic seminar, people let the speaker speak for maybe 10 minutes and then they jump in with questions. So it's really not that you have Absolutely. A lot of control.
Absolutely. And I mean, getting back to the work done by the Economics Network and Clora on what employers need, this creativity and imagination. I see this realized when I train students to compare across different theories, to find similarities and differences. And I say, okay, Karl Marx said this thing, so like, but why can you connect it with Ricardo? How does he match with Keynes's analysis? This is the kind of challenge students struggle the most. And of course, I want to help them to overcome this kind of difficulty. So how do I train them? I already given something away in the sense that I sometimes take away the curtain and show them what's behind, and I tell them about how I prepare for a presentation. But there is also something else, and I'm actually getting better at that. I started off responding to questions like this by saying, well, we are having seminars, we are discussing, so we're having small groups and we're having discussions, and I was never quite satisfied about what happened in seminar. This year, I started to be a little bit more aggressive and say, okay, like, there is no hiding. I'm just gonna sit there and you will have to give me an answer. And I'm just gonna sit there until you do. And it works, but it takes a long time to actually get something out of the students. And I believe that there is still an element that perhaps is not reproduced in a viva-voce conversation, is that very often students are conscious about making a fool of themselves with each other. They wouldn't even mind me, but it's the shame of like peer pressure in the group. And I say, okay, we need to take that away. So what I came up with is oops, I cannot see because I got another. Okay. I came up with the fact that I need to bring it into assessment. So forget about seminars. They don't work in the way I want. In order to manage to get the students to develop that skill, assessment is the driver of learning. I just need to embed more assessments, small stakes, which drive the students in the same direction. So, so like my knowledge of chemistry is 0, but you know, if you develop a model in pedagogy, you always have to give it a fancy title. So I call this the H2 model because it reminds me of the molecule of water. So you're gonna have the skill components, which is gonna be composed of mini VIVAS, one question only. And then you're gonna have the knowledge developed with the essay and the research skills. And you're gonna combine the two together to get to the final outcome. So my design for next year is something of the like. I'm gonna have a 5-minute small VIVAS, mini VIVAS, one question. And I'm gonna have an offline one whereby the students are going to receive an audio clip of me asking a question, and they will have to submit an audio clip with an answer. They're going to get feedback on that. Really small stake, 5%. Then we're going to do an online one where we're going to meet one question, 5%. And then I'm going to raise the weight a little bit more, go offline again, then online again. And then they're going to have the final one where everything gets put together. And I'll be able to tell you whether it works or not next year. But I think this is a much better plan than what I've done in the past. So this is the way that I want to go down to. And I believe that in terms of assessment, it's quite sustainable. It's like one question, 5 minutes. Should be quite easy.
So so obviously we'll come back and talk about the evaluation of this model next year. But what you've been doing so far, what do you think students think about it? What feedback do you have?
It's I mean, it takes a lot of discussion with the students. I think that one of the way I managed to take away some of the fears is by discussing together assessment criteria. Exemplars in pedagogical literature, always very good way to train students and take away fears. So I managed to have students in the past years agreeing to have their recording on my VLE. So that other students can actually see what happens during a Viva. So they see the recording, they watch the recording, and the feedback that I received, a lot of students actually said that they watched the recording, they knew what was going on. So that's been great. Some of this literature say that you shouldn't just share good examples.
Yeah.
You should also share bad examples. And of course, I didn't go that far. I thought it was a bit too much. But yeah, my aspiration will actually get so-and-so Vivas and share that. You know, one of the best comment, well, probably was not best from the students, but from my perspective, it was. I got at the end of the conversation, I had tears in that conversation, and the student told me, it didn't go well, but now I know how to do it. And I just said, well, that's great. Because the next time you do that, this is going to be your job interview. So you know how to do it. And that's great. And in fact, she didn't get a bad mark. It was in the 2-1 rank. You know, she just felt that it was going really badly, you know. But yeah, I mean, students go through the process and they always say like, the majority of comments that I got were, this is the scariest thing I've ever done, but we need more of this. And it's great, you know, like one of the interesting diagrams that I had was showing that despite the fact that students, so this is a kind of assessment where students were telling me whether things went better than expected, as expected, or worse than expected. So this is the evaluation of the conversation across the 2 years. And this is the evaluation of the whole module. And what I found striking, oh, sorry, module on the left and conversation on the right. What I found striking was that even students who believe the conversation didn't go well were not biased in assessing how the module actually worked. And this was matched by the narrative. So once again, the students were saying, oh, this was tough, or I didn't think it went that well. But they were quite happy with the module and the way things were actually run. So they were recognizing the value of the Viva itself, And for me, that is good enough. I mean, I can try to improve my practice, but it seems that the students are on board. I mean, what I've done was actually doing everything in partnership. We agreed on the syllabus together. Every year I change my syllabus according to what the students want me to do. Don't mention me to CMA, but I'm doing what the students want. So I cut and trim wherever the students want me to go, and we agree on criteria together. I mean, there is a lot of discussion about what is going on in the classroom, and I think that is always the best way to handle this kind of innovations.
I think that sounds fabulous, and the point you made, what you had on your slide earlier about assessment for learning, that story actually makes that point, right?
Yeah.
That as much as the Mandarins kind of try to prevent us from having low stakes assessment for learning, but you can do it, and students recognize it.
Yes, and it's learning for us as well.
Yeah, exactly. So just quickly before we go on to the next questions, you can, are you able to share the slides, and do you have a paper that we can put on the CTL website?
Absolutely. I don't have a paper yet, but I have slides, and I'm more than happy to share everything. And the only thing I ask in exchange is people give me feedback. If you think that there is something that I can do better with my rubric, especially, I'm working really hard on the rubric. Please get back to me and we can have a conversation, so I can help you and you can help me as well.
Excellent. That sounds very nice. Thank you. Thank you for being so generous. I guess the next point, following on from the students' feedback, was about sort of marks distributions. So either compared to what you did before the VIVAS or compared to what those students are doing elsewhere in other econ courses. Do you have an idea of how the distributions are different?
I didn't check students across different modules. That's certainly something that I should do. I mean, wherever you set your standards is subjective. Then the important thing is that the mark distribution is consistent. But of course, we set out criteria, and my module is pretty much is not an outlier either upwards or downwards with the second and third year cohorts. So again, an average around 65 and a median around 65 or something like that, which is fair enough. I was something that I can share is that one of my biases was my concern for international students.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting enough, because because I was an international student myself, and I was very worried when my Chinese students were actually enrolling for this module, and that most certainly was a bias that I had to eliminate. But they did a job for me. I cannot notice any difference in the marks distributions, differentiating by home and overseas students, by native speakers and non-native speakers. And as usual, there are different issues, but overall then when it comes to the final assessment, there are no differences. So home native speakers, the problem they have is actually bringing the jargon up to a technical level. So colloquialism, stuff like that get, like I say, no, this is not the way we conduct a conversation. So that's the kind of feedback they get. And then of course, with international is more like, I have to slow down a little. And that's the thing that I really care about, what I love is that it's not students adapting to my way of doing things, but more and more I adapt to the way they are doing things. And in my rubric, I'm very, very resistant to attribute specific weights to the different criterion. And the reason why I am resistant is that if I think about why I like a particular economist, I like some economists because they're great at modeling. And I think that modeling is very clear. I like other economists because they are really good at explaining difficult concepts in a very effective way. Others are able to convince you about anything, right? And And I like them all the same, yet the reason why I like them are different. And especially when you talk about VIVAS, you cannot be too strict in the way you set boundaries amongst the different criteria. So they're all there, but I do like to have some sort of flexibility, with the hope that my flexibility always tries to reward what is good in the person that is in front of me. But I'm open to discussion about that. It's very subjective, and so yeah. So that kind of flexibility and being able to actually appreciate what the students are able to do. And my Chinese students actually really, really surprised me. And some of them, they were extremely good. And they said, I like history. And I say, yes, why not? Why shouldn't you like history? It's great.
That's excellent. And, it's really good to know, because these are some of the concerns that people do have with not just VIVAS, any kind of oral assessment techniques. And I'm wondering whether, like you said, many of us have had an experience being those overseas students, and that helps us perhaps, puts us in a different position ourselves, and that might be a helpful thing. I'm also wondering that, so someone mentioned on here that it does very much sound like an interview rather than, like you said, the evaluative conversation. So yes, you are querying them, but it's like an interview almost. Do you think there's scope for having two people interviewing? Because often in job interviews, you have that, right? You have a panel,
right,
to sort of, allay any fears of bias or things like that, but also having different perspectives.
I will absolutely love that. I mean, the only reason why this is not happening is capacity. I mean, I have a couple of colleagues who are really well trained in historioeconomic thought, where also, from the staff perspective, you have very different distributions. Somebody studied that, somebody didn't, and we have different views. But I mean, here in UEA, we are really strong on pluralism. So this idea of like using different theories, different approaches, and the only reason why it's not happening is just because we're busy doing different things. But if at all possible, I would love it. I would love it. It would be so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, capacity is this horrible constraint that we keep coming up against, unfortunately, right? So related to that, there was a question about, all those steps that you have in your new model. What are you thinking in terms of time? How does that compare to, I mean, I guess it's not fair to compare to other types of like marking written assessments, because you're not doing that at all. But in terms of time, in terms of sort of, how much hard work it is, apart from
Sure.
sort of once you set up the rubric, so the marginal costs each year.
Sure.
Can you say anything on that?
I always saw the silver lining in what happened to us recently. And I mean, it's not that I have to invoke a pandemic to, to get to do some innovation. But even if you think about me and you, how often we've been seeing each other online compared to when we are in, compared to before, it's ridiculous. Like so many more opportunity to interact with colleagues is fantastic, right? So of course our teaching is transforming. One of the fantastic things that happened this year is that, I swiftly have to move all the VIVAS online. So the students were not here with me. And it made the process even faster, because I didn't have students waiting out there, somebody being late, and so managing things online is becoming much quicker. At the same time, the concept of contact time and the way we are organizing our modules is changing. And of course, I repurpose what they used to be seminar time to have this kind of contact time with the students, which is going to be even more effective because it's going to be one-to-one. So some of this time now is going to be spent talking to students one-to-one. We are not going to have a seminar as such. Well, not only. In terms of assessment, actually, I do some written work assessment because I still got that critical essay. And what I can tell you is that, I mean, if you are a conscientious marker, say that I had 2 essays rather than 1, it would have taken me longer. Because if you got a 3,000 word essay, it doesn't take you shorter than 15, 20 minutes, in all honesty, as a good teacher and marker, to assess the work and give a decent gives a piece of feedback, right? So I believe that oral assessment is actually shortening the time. What is scary is when you see all your diary booked with conversations in your Outlook. That is really scary. But the nice thing is this is effective, like it's there. And once you've done it, it's done. Rather than having a pile of scripts that you go get a cup of tea and then a bar of chocolate, and then you count how many you still have to do. We all do that, right? I most certainly will waste much more time doing that than doing VIVAS.
I agree. And I have to say that maybe this is just because I don't do them regularly now, but I had to move online with my presentations. So I had video presentations. I much more enjoyed that, going through that, than reading another thing. So it's, it depends on personal preferences, I guess. So coming back to, I think people are really liking the small stakes, little preparation steps. So I guess you kind of answered this a little bit by saying the mini VIVAS to start off with are almost like office hours, right?
Yeah.
It's one-on-one office hours. So it's one way to, so it addresses two things. A, we know that students often don't turn up to office hours, so it gives them structure to do that. But then it also gives them the prep. Do you have, obviously the new model is something you're going to introduce, but do you have an idea of any guesses as to, from your past experience, how you think this might go? Because, I mean, in our experience, often students, especially overseas students, again, don't come because they're intimidated. It's a one-on-one with a professor, which is a bit scary.
Well, these are going to be summative pieces of assessment, so they will not have a choice, And what I design, I mean, if you recall the slide on the weights, I'm not going to put it up, but, you got like 5%, 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%. So, the stake is going up, right? So the thing is that they're going to have the opportunity to get feedback on a low stake piece, and then they're going to move to another with a higher stake, and so on and so forth, and it's going to spiral up. And hopefully that kind of system is just going to kick in and give students, the confidence to do that. I mean, this is how I operationalize scaffolding in my module. It's just basically giving the scaffold. And the nice thing is that, the question is going to be orally asked, the response is going to be oral, the feedback is going to be oral. So, the medium is the message, isn't it? Like we're going to have conversation. And the nice thing is that, we all speak faster than what we type, so in terms of time, most certainly me, I speak at the speed of light. And in terms of time saved, like typing in feedback, wow, that's going to be huge, in my opinion.
I was actually thinking about that in a different context, that on Turnitin, those of us who mark on Turnitin, for example, you can leave a voice comment, right?
Yes.
Which I personally think is probably going to be quicker, but also personalized, because right in these times, it feels like your teacher's talking to you rather than something that you cut and pasted from other people's comments. Speaking of which, so we have some nice comments on the chat about how you're not scary. You seem like a really nice guy, but can you imagine sort of convincing other colleagues to do something like this? Because it is scary as an enterprise, basically. And then convincing students that other colleagues, I mean, econs are not known for being the nicest, friendliest people, right? That other colleagues are not scary and intimidating and all of that. And, one of the feedback that I hear, not here, because I think we have a self-selected group, so we're preaching to the choir a little bit here, but in other contexts across the university, is that people find it stressful. A one-on-one of any kind, they find it stressful. And if you have a scary econ on the other side, that's super scary.
It is. So I'm going to start from this last point, because this is part of conversation I have also related to the way we are treating students, concerns about mental health, students being distressed, students being depressed. And I say, are we really helping the students by wiping off any kind of concern, any kind of challenge, any kind of stress? I mean, too much stress is not good, but it's not good for us either, But I mean, the pedagogical principle that I'm gonna ground myself on is the experience that I had as a son. You know, my parents were absolutely fantastic. You know, I'm 45 and I think they've done an excellent job, but they were not the softest one, you know. And they were, you know, they were actually pushing me to do things that, and this push, in my opinion, was commensurate with the kind of challenge that I could face. And I'm extremely thankful to them for what they've done. And I believe that now, for fear, once again, you know, we need to be brave. For fear of all this kind of discourse that is going around, of how frail our students are, we are not rendering them any favor by just wiping off any kind of concern. So once again, it's just about making sure that the challenge we set to them is commensurate to what they can actually face, and we support them. Another thing that has come up a lot in feedback from students, both students who did well and students who didn't do so well in the conversation, has been my breaking the ice at the beginning, something that I didn't think about when I was doing it, to be honest with you. So there was no plan there. But everybody mentioned the fact that I would just have like occasional talk and just say, okay, is this your last exam? What are you doing? Which kind of degree you're taking? You know, just having a little chat. If they were international, I would ask them where they're coming from. And to be honest with me, it's also like a way to reset and refresh, because, you know, once you got like certain numbers in a day, make sure that you plan toilet breaks and tea breaks, because the first year I didn't do that and it was a nightmare. But yeah, this kind of occasional, you know, small talk, they extremely valued it. Convincing colleagues, perhaps there are colleagues that shouldn't do it. we are all different, you know. And you've been knowing me for quite a while, you know that I'm quite chatty and I love to connect to people. And of course, you know, that's the reason why I'm so passionate about that, you know. But that's absolutely fine. If some of the colleagues are not that kind of person, they probably shouldn't do that. The important thing is that along the curriculum, we expose the students to this kind of experience with the people who are willing to take up this challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Exactly. It doesn't have to be everywhere, as long as students are exposed to this kind of challenge somewhere. And I completely agree with you on your first point. Might be an unpopular opinion, but there is an optimal amount of stress or toughness or whatever you said, right? Being hard, which will hopefully prepare students. Which brings us to, we just have a question for one more, time for one more question, sorry. This is a great question from Aisha. It's a tough one, though, I have to warn you. Is there anything that we can take away from this conversation about high stakes assessments, like in schools? So this year, for example, the GCSE and A-level exams were canceled. And many of us, at least 3 of us on here, have children who are supposed to take GCSEs next year. And is there something that we can learn from here about having something more like this in those public exams? And that's a much bigger deal, right? Because it's everyone in the country and so on. And how do we kind of convince people that it's fair? So what does sort of fairness mean in that sense? Because I assume that you're not asking everyone the same question, right? So it's not the same. It's fair, but it's not exactly the same thing.
It's not the same question, of course. So I actually, what I started to do this year, once again, was preparing questions in advance and thinking about, in my mind, about classifying questions in easy, medium, and more difficult. But then once again, you can adapt yourself to what is coming across with the conversation. So it's like adaptive tests, you know, like the TOEFL test that I took online. That was like that, you know. If I was giving a correct answer, they were raising the bar, you know. And I do that as well. So I allow students to blossom if they can, or I just stick to the level they are if not. I think once again, running the risk is important because of the students, you know, in order to support the students. The Italian tradition had that for all sorts of exams. So even my school leaving exams in secondary school was an oral.
Really?
Yes,
wow.
Yes, across all the subjects. So I major in Italian and English Lit. and I gave an oral on that in English actually, and
Oh, cool.
so yes, and it was fantastic, you know. But once again, the important thing is a blend of different skills, you know. So I had schoolmates even at school that were much better with their pencil and paper, and they delivered a very good performance there, you know. I was always able to raise my mark with the oral assessments because I'm a performer.
Which is why we love you so much.
It's my job.
But this is a really good point, because again, coming back to the issue of fairness and plagiarism and so on, we know in this country, right, that certain kind of schools prepare their students not necessarily to understand that much more, but prepare to perform that much better in the exam. And, you know, it's hard to prepare someone, or maybe harder to prepare someone in an oral sort of impromptu kind of thing. I mean, it's possible to teach for anything, but perhaps this is a little bit, yes, it makes it a little bit easier. So you have to know your stuff kind of to perform like that. One final question, sorry, it's a little one, so I think we can sneak it in. So, you know, you talked about how you categorize the questions and pick from different things and have an adaptive sort of response to what people are saying. Do you have complaints from students thinking that everyone else is getting easier questions than us?
I never had a single complaint in 3 years. And the kind of narrative, this is going to be in the slides, so you can have a look, and also students' quotes. So basically, for students who claim that the conversation went better than expected, they all acknowledge the support they received and the kind of the small talk and all these kind of things, the confidence. Those who underperformed, when asked to elaborate on that, they all say, it was my fault, I didn't prepare. And that to me was a huge achievement, or like, oh, you didn't ask me the questions that I was expecting. And I said, well, fair enough. So we both know where we stand. I never had a single appeal. I never heard a squeak. Perhaps still, I actually had requests for remarks in the essay. But they used to do that because they used to do that in other modules. You know, you got some students are like that. You know, or perhaps perhaps they were right. I don't know. Nothing in conversations, and they knew they could. They knew they could. So it worked.
I think that's excellent, and that also shows a level of reflection, self-reflection in the students about why they did badly, or, you know, the fact that they said something, you know, they didn't know what to expect or whatever, which is super impressive, I think, and a great place to end the session. As you can see, it's you know, these sessions are always very lively with lots of questions coming and going. So I hope that we haven't put you through too tough a Viva.
It was good fun.
But thank you very much. I think you've given us all lots of things to think about. I mean, Claude and I are both definitely thinking about Vivas for this coming year, if we can. And I, you know, everything that you've said today basically is just giving me more confidence. We'll see. We'll just see how well administrators react, and in terms of sort of timing, how it goes. But thank you very much. And welcome. For everyone on YouTube and Zoom, thank you for attending. The recording will be on YouTube, of course, and we'll share Fabio's slides as well. And I'm sure he's happy to answer questions also.
Absolutely.
Individually. Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.